Oh, my friends, it's Spoilerin time once again, where we look at some of the most interesting, weirdest, oddest, strangest free shows that we can find streaming on the internet and watch them and try to explain them to you. And hopefully you're having fun watching them along with us. I'm Tom Merritt. He's Brian Brushwood.
Oh my goodness. Boy, do we have a gem for you this week. I can't even.
Indeed. We watched season 5, episode 14 of Miami Vice called The Lost Madonna, which honestly was not that bad of a plot, but the star of the show, certainly for us, was the first acting credit for Michael Chiklis, later of the Shield fame and Fantastic Four. I don't even know where to start. The hair, the suit, the fact that he's an effete art lover. Brian, what did you make of this?
Just fill in the gaps. Also, he did the commish before he did the Shield. But boy, was that man meant? He was born to play the slime ball. Like I don't understand.
It is it's consistent in that it's a slime ball character, right? In fact, there was early, like maybe a quarter of the way in, I was like, it's Chiklis, right? So he's going to be corrupt. And then towards the end, I'm like, oh, he's totally going to steal that art. And of course he did.
What was funny for me was I didn't know if he was going to steal the drugs, the money, or the art.
Right.
I was genuinely like, well, he's going to steal one. I wonder which one.
Exactly. And he was an art lover. He was in it for the higher calling, for the art and the money, but also the art.
Tom, the best scene in this entire thing is where, in order to go undercover, Crockett and Tubbs need to get educated in the merchandise that needs to be moved. And that probably meant for most of their careers, the types of counterfeit money or the types of illicit substances or what have you.
What does
in this case,
look like?
They needed to learn a lot about art. I legitimately don't know how many of these artists or movements or anything was real. And then I realized maybe because what they really wanted to do is move illegal art, theoretically, it would be better if they were clearly talking out of their butts getting things wrong, because it would clue in people who want to buy illicit stolen art that they're skullduggerous scoundrels.
Crockett should do that. Tubbs couldn't, because Tubbs was supposed to be an art history professor, right?
Mm. With the worst fashion sense, just the worst drips on Tubbs all episode.
I'll have you know, they complimented him multiple times on his fashion sense and his style. So, what are you calling them, liars?
You could see his tie. You could see the awful tie under the collar. Like the collar wasn't even like worn well, and then it's just bad. And they gave him the little ponytail. Just bad. Really, just not good.
Okay, which was worse? Which was worse, Tubbs' outfit or the constant cliche of art is for dummies? Art is for dummy snobs. That was Miami Vice, certainly not the first one to do this, but they very clearly were like, oh, if you're an artist, you're crazy or you're weird.
Eccentric.
Yeah.
I think that this show ended up being better than even maybe contemporary shows about fine art are. I mean, I think that they do give it a lot of skepticism. You know, they talk about the white painting or piece in that instructional bit, not a real painting, not the real artist. And, you know, they're kind of cracking wise, but they realize that they need to learn this and that there is value here, whether or not you appreciate it. So I think they rode the line in a good way, especially for friggin' 1989.
Well, and
yeah, for 1989, I didn't think it was unusual anyway. Yeah,
they're kind of poking fun at the crawled all the way up their own butts. Some artists were perceived as talking about their own craft at the time, but also we three right now are guilty of the same thing. We're crawled up our own butts. We
Sure.
exist in a shared hallucination that podcasts matter and that opinions about streaming things matter. So I found this kind of vaguely self-aware in that, and just be all like, yeah, man, art matters to the extent that you care about it. And if you have a lot of money, then sure, go ahead and drop $250,000 and then buy back your own art to essentially establish a provenance so it becomes legitimate art and no longer stolen art.
Right.
I will double down though that I think it's unfair, and it's again not unusual, that there is no one in the art world depicted as legitimate. There's the sculpture guy who's just like a wild drug fueled, sort of long haired crazy man, and then there's the sister who's kind of actually the closest to legitimate, but she's really just in it to like make the money, even though she kind of does love the art. There's Chiklis, who ostensibly loves the art, but also he's clearly a crook. At least we find out by the end. There's nobody who's like the real, what a real art appreciator.
I disagree. I think Chiklis is, may I remind you of the facts, Your Honor? Chiklis so treasured the art that
He put on this
he
disguise.
put on
That's
he
not-
put on
that's-
this
I'm not saying
disguise.
there's no one who loved art. I'm saying that is not what typical art appreciators exist as. And granted, it's a weird scene. There's some characters in it, but everybody here was a character, Chiklis included.
I was definitely waiting for like a double fake out where, he just finds a box and is just like, well, this must be part of the triptych. I'm going to take it. I got the Madonna. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you didn't look in the false bottom underneath in the trunk or whatever.
But we did with
But
the,
we did
the
get
last
that in
second
a
fake
way.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he breaks what he thinks is the original, and it turns out it was a clever forgery. Forgeries are very easy to pass. These people are not good at detecting forgeries because we get two of those.
Including the art collector, including the auction house, like the
Yeah,
people who
yeah.
really should have. Man,
Maybe that's to your point, Brian. Is these are shysters, so that kind of shows that there's skullduggery about it.
There is an entire syndicate of people where they will hire entire teams of forgery experts, and they will have a legitimate person buy a legitimate piece of art, and then later that legitimate person who bought the legitimate piece of art will sell it legitimately at auction, but it will be the forgery that gets sold,
be the
and then now the original enters the black market in there.
That would have been a cool element of the story.
But they hadn't invented that type of crime. I guess actually no,
Yeah, I
it
guess
had been
so.
around.
That's fair.
yeah.
I also found it charming that Michael Chiklis's character wanted to take a boat to Paris.
And gets lost in the
He's like,
seaport.
when he says at the beginning, like my ideal life is taking a boat to Paris. I'm like, oh, okay, that's overdoing it. Even in 1989, people weren't taking a lot of boats to Paris anymore. And then at the end, they're like, nope, he's doubling down. He definitely wants to take a boat. Like he is into it.
We're also starting to see the cracks on the edges of the production. I know we're in the last season or whatever, but like when U.S. Customs, like the word customs is kind of half peeled down off of the front of,
I don't know.
the
Maybe
desk.
it was like that in Miami in 1989. Who knows?
Maybe.
This is an interesting note from the Wikipedia. Shortly after this episode was filmed, NBC had announced the cancellation of Miami Vice. And so I think when we talked about the beginning of the season, the idea was they were trying to retool it to be what it originally was in some way, of more action-y, more, and we see a lot. That is what this episode is in spades.
For sure.
But I think after this point, if this is where the crew knows that the show's been canceled, then we might find some. Well, I guess the scripts and stuff would be done, but we might find some senioritis after this episode.
Yeah,
It's
I felt like the story was better than some of the ones we've watched recently.
the story's fine, but if what you want is to be a very popular television show in prime time on Friday nights, maybe, just throwing this out here, maybe not run a script where literally every single character but one is constantly rolling their eyes at the subject of this episode. I don't think that
Yeah.
really upped the stakes to anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you think of Michael Chiklis's Master of Disguise moment?
The way that they set that up too was so strange also because it's just cutting to Crockett over and over again in like a sea of black people.
Yes,
and
Jamaicans.
And you're like, why are we doing this now? And then you see him in the wing.
What? And all these Jamaicans, but one of them is white? I don't understand.
A boat terminal might look like a bus terminal, but this really looked like a bus terminal. This looked like a crowd of people about to get on a bus to go somewhere.
Yeah, were they lining up for anything? Were they coming?
Yeah.
Like they were just mingling. They were just mingling.
Yeah.
It was a party.
Yeah, I felt in my imagination, the pitch meeting is all right. What have we done? We've done dangers. We've done drugs. We've done people killing each other. What if there was, hold on. No tension. A thing nobody really understands. Everyone's rolling their eyes constantly. A guy we ain't never met turns out to be a bad guy from within the force.
That's par for the course. Though,
Was he even really a bad guy? I could see a world where he was so obsessed.
He's the only good guy because he cares so much about art.
He was so obsessed with it.
At least he had a pure motivation, right?
Mm-hmm. The idea was he said right before the meetup was, I'm going to put the safety of this art piece over your drugs.
He called a shot.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about that.
Speaking of called shots, we see somebody get shot 3 times in the chest, and we see 3 holes appear in his chest, and we see him hit the back of the wall and slide down it, and there's a smear of blood. And I remember thinking, haven't we been talking about for season after season they never show blood on this? That seems like a step in a new direction. Then later, the other bad guy gets shot right in the chest, and he sticks his hand in and pulls out blood and says the words, "That's real blood," and then falls over dead.
It's real blood, man.
I have a feeling that some behind-the-scenes standards and practices may have had some feedback on this episode.
Do you think it was you can't show blood coming out of a body? Because both of those, the blood was on the wall, right? You didn't see it coming out of the body. And the other one, he like sticks his hand in and it comes out. We didn't see him bleeding.
All I know is
Maybe that's how they skated around the rules somehow.
we've never even seen a bullet hole before now. We've only seen like just people at point blank range get shot and then
freeze
with
frame.
nothing they go, oh, and then fall
My
over.
immediate thought was that like, oh, did they actually shoot him? Like, why would you say, hey, that's real blood, man, when you were expecting it to be fake? Because you're an actor on Miami Vice. That's the only reason you would say that.
They haven't gotten all the way to like actual squibs at this point, but this is the most bloody, gruesome, graphic depiction of real life crime on the streets.
As we head into the 90s.
in the entire series.
They seemed really calm, by the way, when Chiklis radioed in officer down. Everybody just kind of walked in and was like, is there an officer down?
Officer down? Where's the officer down? Hello, excuse me, party for officer down.
So I poked around in the wiki, and apparently during this season, one thing that we're missing because we're skipping around is there's apparently a pretty strong B plot throughout the entire season about Switek slowly falling into gambling addiction. I was hoping we would get a peek at that, but we didn't in this.
Yeah, we didn't. You mentioned that last week, and I was looking for signs of that, and there really wasn't anything.
Apparently that comes to a head in the season finale in Freefall.
Very good.
Yeah.
That is what we will be watching next, as a matter of fact. Freefall parts 1 and 2, the return of Ian McShane, and guest star Robert Beltran, but it is not the final episode of Miami Vice.
Reminder that cordkillers@gmail.com. Get your thoughts in before we figure out what we're going to do next.
Yeah, so that is the plan. Next week, Free Fall part. It may or may not be parts 1 and 2, depending on where you find it. But we will be watching both parts if you find it broken down, parts 1 and 2. And then one more Miami Vice the week after that. And then off into the wild new world of whatever we choose to watch next, which you have a voice in, cordkillers@gmail.com. If you want us talking about more shows, current shows, what our strategy is going forward, and anything else, you got to become a patron and get these episodes early and get After Talk, which is available at patreon.com/cordkillers. We'll spoil you again next time.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.